The golden rays of dawn filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Captain James Morrison had been walking these corridors for 15 years, but today felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a tension he couldn't quite place his finger on. As the head of the royal security detail, James had developed an instinct for danger that had never failed him. Princess Isabella, just 8 years old, was scheduled for her morning walk in the palace gardens. Her bright laughter often echoed through these halls, bringing life to the ancient stones. The princess was beloved by everyone who worked at the palace. Her curious nature and kind heart made her a favorite among the staff, from the kitchen maids to the highest-ranking officials. James checked his watch. It was 7:30 a.m., and the princess would be coming down for breakfast soon. He had positioned his team strategically throughout the palace, as he did every day. Today's security detail included 6 guards, each handpicked for their loyalty and skill. The morning briefing had been routine, with no specific threats reported. Yet something nagged at James, a feeling he had learned never to ignore. The palace kitchen was already bustling with activity. Chef Margaret was preparing the princess's favorite breakfast, of scrambled eggs and toast cut into star shapes. The young royal had specific preferences that the entire staff had memorized. She liked her orange juice fresh squeezed, her toast lightly buttered, and always insisted on having fresh flowers on her breakfast table. As James made his rounds, he noticed several new faces among the palace staff. It wasn't unusual for temporary workers to be brought in during busy periods, but today's additions seemed to appear overnight. When he inquired with the head butler, Mr. Whitman explained that they were filling in for staff members who had called in sick. 3 kitchen assistants and 2 cleaning personnel had been added to the morning shift. The princess's governess, Miss Catherine Hartwell, was already preparing lessons for the day. Isabella was an exceptional student who showed particular interest in languages and history. Her morning schedule included French lessons, followed by a mathematics session, and then her beloved garden walk, where she would collect flowers and observe the wildlife that lived within the palace grounds. James positioned himself near the grand staircase where he could observe all the main pathways. From this vantage point, he could see the entrance to the dining room, the corridor leading to the gardens, and the service passages used by the staff. His radio crackled occasionally with routine check-ins from other team members positioned throughout the palace. At exactly 8 a.m., Princess Isabella appeared at the top of the staircase. She wore a light blue dress with white stockings and her favorite black patent leather shoes. Her golden hair was neatly braided with a matching blue ribbon. The young princess moved with the grace that had been carefully taught by her etiquette instructors, but her eyes sparkled with the mischief typical of any 8-year-old child. "Good morning, Captain Morrison," she called out cheerfully as she descended the stairs. Her voice carried the proper pronunciation and tone expected of royalty, yet it retained the warmth and innocence of childhood. James smiled and bowed slightly as she passed, falling into step a respectful distance behind her. The dining room had been prepared perfectly for the princess's arrival. Fresh white roses adorned the center of the table, and her breakfast was arranged exactly as she preferred. Miss Hartwell was already seated, reviewing the day's lessons. The morning routine proceeded normally, with Isabella chatting about her plans for the garden walk and asking questions about the flowers she hoped to find blooming. During breakfast, James noticed movement in his peripheral vision. One of the new kitchen assistants seemed to be lingering near the serving door longer than necessary. The man was tall and thin, with dark hair and unremarkable features. Nothing about him seemed immediately threatening. Yet James felt his protective instincts sharpen. He made a mental note to verify the man's credentials after the princess finished her meal. The conversation at the breakfast table centered around Isabella's upcoming birthday celebration. She would be turning 9 in just 2 weeks, and the entire palace was involved in planning what promised to be a magnificent celebration. Foreign dignitaries would attend, along with members of other royal families from across Europe. The security preparations for such an event were extensive and had been occupying much of James's attention lately. As Isabella finished her breakfast, she excused herself politely and asked permission to begin her morning walk. Miss Hartwell reminded her to stay on the designated paths and to return within 1 hour for her French lesson. The princess promised to be punctual, as she always was, and headed toward the garden entrance with the excitement of someone about to embark on a great adventure. James followed at his usual distance, speaking quietly into his radio to alert the outdoor security team of the princess's approach. The palace gardens were extensive, covering several acres of carefully manicured lawns, flower beds, and walking paths. Ancient oak trees provided shade and privacy, while ornate fountains added the gentle sound of flowing water to the peaceful atmosphere. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass. Isabella walked with purpose toward her favorite section of the garden, where a small pond was surrounded by benches and flowering bushes. This was where she liked to sit and observe the ducks and fish while collecting flower petals for her pressed flower collection. As they walked, James maintained constant communication with his team. Guard positions were confirmed and all seemed normal. The perimeter was secure, with no unusual activity reported. Yet the feeling of unease that had plagued him all morning continued to grow stronger. His years of experience had taught him to trust these instincts, even when everything appeared perfectly normal on the surface. The princess stopped to admire a particularly beautiful rosebush, and James took the opportunity to scan their surroundings more carefully. The garden paths wound through carefully planned landscaping that provided both beauty and strategic sight lines for security purposes. Every bench, statue, and tree had been considered in the overall security plan for this area. Isabella's laughter drew his attention back to her. She had discovered a butterfly that had landed on her outstretched finger, and she was delighted by the unexpected visitor. The moment was picture perfect, exactly the kind of innocent joy that made protecting her not just a duty, but a privilege. James found himself smiling despite his underlying concerns. As they continued toward the pond, James noticed that one of the outdoor security team members was not in his assigned position. This was highly unusual, and immediately set off alarm bells in his mind. He spoke into his radio requesting the man's location. The response came back that Guard Thompson had been called away to assist with a delivery at the main gate. This explanation didn't sit well with James. All deliveries were scheduled and coordinated through the security office, and no deliveries were planned for this morning. He immediately requested verification of this information while maintaining his position behind the princess, who was now approaching her favorite bench by the pond. The radio crackled with urgent whispers as his team worked to locate Thompson and verify the supposed delivery. James felt his muscles tense as the situation began to feel more serious. He moved slightly closer to Isabella while trying to appear calm and normal. The princess was completely absorbed in watching the ducks glide across the pond's surface and remained unaware of any developing situation. Within minutes, the radio confirmed what James had feared. There was no scheduled delivery, and Guard Thompson could not be located. His radio was not responding, and his last known position was near the garden's eastern entrance, approximately 200 yards from where James and Isabella currently stood. James made a quick decision. While maintaining the appearance of normalcy, he began to gradually guide the princess back toward the palace. He suggested they return early to have extra time before her French lesson, making the suggestion sound casual and unimportant. Isabella was disappointed to cut her walk short, but agreed without argument. As they began walking back toward the palace, James increased the frequency of his radio communications. All remaining team members were asked to converge on their position while maintaining discretion. The princess continued her innocent chatter about the ducks and the butterfly, completely unaware that her security detail was quietly mobilizing around her. The walk back seemed to take forever, though it was probably only 5 minutes. James found himself analyzing every shadow, every movement in his peripheral vision. His training kicked in fully now, and he moved into the hyper-alert state that had kept him and his charges safe throughout his career. As they approached the palace's garden entrance, James finally allowed himself to believe they would make it back safely. The princess was chatting about her pressed flower collection and asking if they could return to the garden after her lessons. James assured her they could, though privately he was already planning significantly increased security measures for any future outdoor activities. The palace door came into view, and James could see 2 of his team members positioned discreetly near the entrance. Everything appeared normal and secure. Isabella skipped slightly as they walked, her happiness completely unmarred by the tension that had been building around her. For a moment, James wondered if he had been overly cautious, if his instincts had led him to overreact to what might have been simply a miscommunication about Thompson's whereabouts. That moment of doubt vanished instantly as a figure emerged from behind the large oak tree that stood just 20 feet from the palace entrance. The man was dressed in maintenance coveralls and carried a clipboard, appearing to be exactly what he pretended to be. But James recognized him immediately as the kitchen assistant who had been lingering too long during breakfast. The man's eyes locked onto Princess Isabella with an intensity that immediately confirmed James's worst fears. This was no coincidence. No case of mistaken identity or innocent confusion. The man began walking directly toward them with purposeful strides, and James could see that beneath the coveralls, his physique suggested someone far more athletic and dangerous than any kitchen worker. Time seemed to slow as James processed the threat and began to react, his years of training condensed into pure instinct as he positioned himself between the approaching man and the princess. Isabella, still oblivious to the danger, continued walking toward the palace entrance, humming softly to herself. The intruder's hand moved toward something concealed beneath his coveralls, and James knew that whatever was about to happen, it would define not just this moment, but possibly the rest of their lives. The peaceful morning garden was about to become the setting for a confrontation that would test every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of courage that James possessed. As the distance between them continued to shrink, James made his final preparations for what was about to unfold, knowing that Princess Isabella's safety depended entirely on his actions in the next few crucial moments. James Morrison's world narrowed to a single point of focus as the disguised intruder continued his approach toward Princess Isabella. Every second stretched like an eternity as James calculated distances, angles, and possible outcomes. His radio was alive with urgent chatter as his team responded to the developing situation. But their voices seemed to come from another world entirely. The man in coveralls was now less than 15 feet away, and his intentions were becoming clearer with each step. James could see the calculation in the intruder's eyes, the way he was timing his approach to intercept the princess before she could reach the safety of the palace entrance. Whatever training this man had received, it was evident that he was no ordinary criminal, but someone with specific skills and a carefully planned mission. Princess Isabella remained blissfully unaware of the danger approaching from behind. She had stopped to examine a small caterpillar crawling across the path, her natural curiosity overriding any sense of urgency to return indoors. Her innocent fascination with the tiny creature provided both a blessing and a curse. It slowed their progress toward safety, but it also kept her stationary and predictable in her movements. James made a split-second decision that would define everything that followed. Rather than calling out and potentially causing panic or unpredictable movement from either the princess or the intruder, he chose to act with swift, silent precision. He stepped forward and to his left, placing himself directly in the path between the approaching threat and Isabella. "Your Royal Highness," James said in a calm, measured tone that betrayed none of the adrenaline coursing through his system, "perhaps we should collect that caterpillar friend of yours and take him inside where he'll be safer." His words were carefully chosen to give Isabella a reason to move toward him and away from the approaching danger without alarming her. The intruder realized his cover was blown the moment James repositioned himself. The pretense of being a maintenance worker disappeared as the man's hand moved decisively toward whatever weapon he had concealed. James caught the motion in his peripheral vision and knew there were perhaps 2 seconds before this situation escalated beyond the point of containment. Isabella looked up from the caterpillar with a smile, ready to agree with James's suggestion. Her movement caused her to turn slightly, and for the first time she noticed the man approaching them. Her smile faltered as she sensed something wrong in the stranger's intense stare and purposeful stride. Children often possess an instinctive awareness of danger that adults have learned to suppress, and Isabella felt it now. "Captain Morrison?" she said quietly, the uncertainty clear in her voice. Her training in royal protocol had taught her to remain calm and dignified in all circumstances, but she was still just 8 years old, and fear was beginning to creep into her expression. James heard the question in her voice and knew he had to act immediately. "Stay right behind me, Your Highness," he instructed firmly but gently. "Do not move until I tell you." His tone carried the absolute authority that Isabella had been taught to respect from her security detail, and she instinctively obeyed. The intruder abandoned all pretense now. His hand emerged from beneath the coveralls, holding what appeared to be a small device, not a weapon in the traditional sense, but something electronic that James couldn't immediately identify. The man's movements became more aggressive and purposeful as he closed the final distance between them. "Princess Isabella," the intruder called out in a voice that carried an accent James couldn't place. "Please come with me. I have something very important to show you." His tone was deceptively gentle, the kind of voice that might convince a trusting child to follow a stranger. But his eyes remained hard and calculating, focused entirely on his target. James positioned himself more squarely between the man and Isabella, his own training taking over completely now. Years of preparation for exactly this type of situation crystallized into pure instinct and muscle memory. "Sir, you need to stop right there and identify yourself," he commanded in a voice that carried absolute authority. The intruder ignored James completely, speaking directly to Isabella again. "Your parents sent me to fetch you, Princess. There's been a change in your schedule, and you need to come with me right now." The lie was smooth and practiced, delivered with just enough urgency to seem believable to a child. Isabella pressed closer to James's back, her small hands gripping the fabric of his uniform jacket. "I don't know you," she said in a voice that was trying to sound brave, but couldn't quite hide her fear. "Captain Morrison, I don't think Mama and Papa would send someone I don't know." James felt a surge of pride in the young princess's instincts and intelligence even as the situation continued to deteriorate. "That's absolutely right, Your Highness," he confirmed. "No one your parents would send would approach us this way." He kept his voice steady and reassuring while his body tensed for whatever was about to happen. The electronic device in the intruder's hand began to emit a soft beeping sound, and James realized it might be some type of communication or tracking equipment. The man was likely not working alone, and this device could be signaling other accomplices or recording the encounter for unknown purposes. The complexity of the threat was becoming clearer, and it was far more sophisticated than a simple kidnapping attempt. "Last warning," James stated firmly. "Identify yourself and state your business, or I will consider you a hostile threat to the royal family." His hand moved to his service weapon, a movement that was subtle but unmistakable in its meaning. The intruder would have no doubt about James's readiness to use whatever force was necessary to protect Isabella. The man's expression shifted, and James could see him calculating his options. The pretense of being sent by Isabella's parents wasn't working, and the direct approach was being blocked by James's positioning. The intruder was clearly trained and experienced, but he was also now facing a professional security operative who was equally skilled and far more motivated. Isabella's grip on James's jacket tightened as she sensed the escalating tension. "Captain Morrison, I want to go inside now," she whispered, the brave facade finally giving way to the natural fear any child would feel in this situation. Her request was simple and heartbreaking in its innocence. She wanted safety, and she trusted James to provide it. "We're going inside right now, Your Highness," James assured her, beginning to slowly sidestep toward the palace entrance, while maintaining his position between Isabella and the intruder. "Just stay right behind me and do exactly as I say." Each step was calculated and deliberate, designed to increase their distance from the threat while moving toward backup and safety. The intruder matched their movement, maintaining his distance but adjusting his angle to cut off their path to the palace entrance. His tactical awareness was evident in the way he anticipated their movement and repositioned accordingly. This was definitely someone with military or specialized training, not a random criminal or opportunist. James's radio crackled with urgent updates from his team. "Captain, we have visual on your position. 2 more suspects identified on the eastern perimeter. Orders?" The voice belonged to Sergeant Williams, James's most experienced team member, and the information confirmed James's worst fears. This was a coordinated attack with multiple participants. "Maintain positions but be ready to move," James responded quietly into his radio. "Priority 1 is Princess Isabella's safety. Do not engage unless I give the signal or the situation becomes critical." He needed his team positioned for support, but he also couldn't risk a chaotic confrontation that might put Isabella in greater danger. The intruder seemed to hear the radio communication and realize that his window of opportunity was closing rapidly. His demeanor shifted from calculated patience to barely controlled urgency. "Princess, you need to come with me now," he repeated, this time with more authority and less pretense at gentleness. I'm not going anywhere with you, Isabella replied, her voice stronger now. The 8-year-old princess was finding her courage, and her response carried the authority of someone born to rule, even at her young age. Captain Morrison, please take me to Mama and Papa. James felt another surge of pride and protective instinct.
Absolutely, Your Highness. We're going to see them right now.
He continued their careful movement toward the palace entrance, each step bringing them closer to safety, but also potentially triggering whatever plan the intruders had prepared. The electronic device in the intruder's hand beeped more rapidly now, and James could see the man becoming increasingly agitated. Whatever timeline he was operating under, it was clearly being compressed by the delay in achieving his objective. The man's eyes darted between Isabella and the palace entrance, calculating distances and timing. "This is your final opportunity to cooperate," the intruder said, his voice losing all pretense of friendliness. "The princess needs to come with me, and interference will not be tolerated." The threat was now explicit and directed at both Isabella and James. James stopped their sideways movement and faced the intruder directly. "The only place Princess Isabella is going is inside this palace, and the only way you're going to prevent that is over my dead body." His statement was not bravado, but a simple statement of fact. He would die before allowing harm to come to the child in his protection. The intruder's hand moved again, this time producing what was clearly a weapon, small, compact, but undeniably lethal. The game of words and positioning was over, and the real confrontation was about to begin. James had perhaps 2 seconds to make decisions that would determine whether Princess Isabella lived or died, whether his team could neutralize the other threats, and whether this carefully planned attack would succeed or fail. Isabella sensed the change in atmosphere even before she saw the weapon. Her grip on James's jacket became desperate, and she pressed herself as close to his back as possible. "Captain Morrison," she whispered, "I'm scared." "I know you are, Your Highness," James replied softly, never taking his eyes off the intruder. "But I'm right here, and I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I promise." It was a promise he intended to keep no matter what the cost, and both Isabella and the intruder understood the absolute commitment behind his words. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, with every person involved understanding that the next few seconds would determine the outcome of everything that had led to this confrontation. James gathered himself for what was about to come, knowing that his years of training, his protective instincts, and his love for the innocent child behind him would be tested in ways he had never imagined possible. The weapon in the intruder's hand gleamed dully in the morning sunlight, and James Morrison's world condensed to a single crystal-clear moment of absolute clarity. Every instinct, every hour of training, every protective impulse he possessed focused on the small figure pressed against his back. Princess Isabella's trust in him was complete and absolute, and he would not let her down. "Step aside, Captain," the intruder commanded, his voice now carrying the cold efficiency of someone accustomed to violence. "This doesn't have to involve you. We only want the princess, and if you cooperate, no one else needs to be hurt." The offer was delivered with practiced calm, but James could see the tension in the man's shoulders, the slight tremor in his weapon hand that suggested he was operating under extreme time pressure. James didn't move an inch. "That's not going to happen," he replied with absolute certainty. "If you want to reach her, you'll have to go through me, and I promise you that's going to be far more difficult than you're prepared for." His own hand had found the grip of his service weapon, though he hadn't yet drawn it. The tactical situation required precise timing and absolute commitment. Behind him, Isabella remained pressed close, her small hand still gripping his jacket. He could feel her trembling, but she hadn't cried out or panicked. Her royal training was serving her well even in this terrifying situation, and James drew strength from her courage. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "when I tell you to run toward the palace door, you do it as fast as you can. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything. Do you understand?" "Yes, Captain Morrison," Isabella whispered back, her voice barely audible but steady. "But I don't want to leave you." The simple statement nearly broke James's heart. Even in mortal danger, the 8-year-old princess was concerned about abandoning someone who was trying to protect her. "I'll be right behind you," James assured her, though they both knew it might not be true. "But right now, getting you to safety is the most important thing. Your parents need to know you're safe." He felt her nod against his back, accepting the necessity even as her grip on his jacket tightened further. The intruder was growing increasingly agitated as precious seconds ticked away. His electronic device was beeping more rapidly now, and James suspected it was either a timer counting down to some predetermined deadline or a communication device connecting him with other members of his team. Either way, the man's window of opportunity was clearly closing, making him more dangerous and unpredictable. James's radio crackled with updates from his security team. "Captain, we have eyes on the 2 additional suspects. They're moving toward your position from the East Garden path. Estimated arrival in 90 seconds. Sergeant Williams's voice was professionally calm, but James could hear the underlying tension. His team was preparing for a coordinated response, but 90 seconds might as well be 90 hours in a situation like this. "Acknowledged," James responded quietly. "Maintain distance until my signal. Protect the palace entrances and be ready to escort the princess to safety." He needed his team positioned for support, but he couldn't risk them moving too close and potentially triggering a violent response from the intruder. The man with the weapon had heard the radio communication and understood that his tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Time's up, Captain," he snarled, raising his weapon to a more threatening position. "Last chance to step aside before this gets messy for everyone." James drew his own weapon in a single, fluid motion that spoke of countless hours of practice and absolute familiarity with the equipment. "The only thing getting messy here is your carefully planned operation," he replied, his voice carrying the steady confidence of someone who had faced life-and-death situations before. "You picked the wrong princess to target, and you definitely picked the wrong guard to threaten." Isabella felt the change in James's posture and knew instinctively that the moment of action was approaching. Despite her fear, she prepared herself to follow his instructions exactly. Her governess had always praised her for being an obedient student, and now that training might save her life. The intruder's eyes flicked between James, Isabella, and the approaching palace entrance. His tactical assessment was clearly not going according to plan. Whatever intelligence his organization had gathered about the palace security, they had underestimated both the skill of the guards and the protective instincts that drove them. "You have no idea what forces you're interfering with," the intruder said, attempting to regain psychological control of the situation. "This is much bigger than one little princess or one palace guard. Step aside now, and you might live to see tomorrow." James almost smiled at the empty threat. "I've been protecting members of this royal family for 15 years, he replied calmly. "I've faced threats from terrorists, assassins, kidnappers, and every other type of criminal you can imagine. None of them succeeded, and neither will you." His confidence wasn't bravado. It was the certainty that came from years of successful mission completions and absolute dedication to his duty. The electronic device in the intruder's free hand began emitting a new pattern of beeps, more urgent and insistent than before. James recognized the sound as some type of warning or countdown signal. Whatever plan this man was part of, it was reaching a critical juncture, and the pressure was clearly affecting his decision-making process. "Princess Isabella," the intruder called out, trying once more to appeal directly to the child. "Your parents are in danger, and only I can help them. You need to come with me right now if you want to save them." It was a desperate ploy, but one that might work on a frightened 8-year-old who loved her parents more than life itself. James felt Isabella's grip on his jacket waver slightly as the man's words hit their mark. "Don't listen to him, Your Highness," he said firmly but gently. "Your parents are safe inside the palace, and the only danger to them is if this man gets what he wants. Trust me, not him." Isabella's voice came out stronger than before when she responded directly to the intruder. "My parents taught me never to go anywhere with strangers, especially strangers who point weapons at my friends. Captain Morrison is my friend, and you're trying to hurt him. I won't help you do that." The simple moral clarity of a child's perspective cut through all the tactical complexity of the situation. James felt a surge of protective pride that nearly overwhelmed his professional composure. This brave little girl deserved to grow up safe and free, and he would make sure she had that chance. The intruder's patience finally snapped completely. "Enough!" he shouted, raising his weapon toward James. "Move aside or I'll move you aside permanently." The pretense of controlled professionalism disappeared, replaced by the raw desperation of someone whose carefully laid plans were falling apart. James tensed his muscles, preparing for the explosive action that would follow. "Isabella, when I say run, you go as fast as you can toward the palace door. Don't look back, don't stop, just run. Do you understand?" His voice carried the absolute authority of someone giving final instructions. "I understand," Isabella replied, her voice small but determined. "Captain Morrison, please be careful." The innocence of her concern for his safety in the midst of her own mortal danger was almost more than James could bear. The intruder's weapon was now pointed directly at James's chest, the distance between them close enough that missing would be nearly impossible. But James had faced armed opponents before, and he knew that desperation often led to mistakes. The man's tactical position was actually weaker than it appeared. He was isolated, outnumbered, and operating under severe time pressure. James's radio crackled one final time with Sergeant Williams's voice. "Captain, additional suspects are 30 seconds from your position. Orders?" The moment of decision had arrived, and everything that followed would be determined by the choices made in the next few heartbeats. "Execute Protective Protocol Alpha," James replied, using the code phrase that would trigger his team's coordinated response to protect Isabella. "All units converge on the princess's position and prepare for immediate extraction." The formal language masked the emotional weight of what he was asking. His team needed to be ready to complete the mission if he couldn't. The intruder heard the radio communication and realized that his window of opportunity had closed completely. Whatever his original plan had been, it was no longer viable. But cornered and desperate men often make the most dangerous choices, and James could see the calculation in the man's eyes shifting from tactical withdrawal to violent last resort. "Isabella," James said quietly, "get ready to run, right now." He gathered himself for what was about to happen, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether his 15 years of service would end in success or failure, whether Princess Isabella would live to see her 9th birthday, and whether the oath he had taken to protect the royal family would be honored with his life if necessary. The morning sun continued to shine peacefully over the palace gardens, oblivious to the life and death drama playing out beneath its warm rays. Birds sang in the ancient oak trees. The fountain continued its gentle splashing, and somewhere in the distance, the normal sounds of palace life continued undisturbed. But for James Morrison, Princess Isabella, and the desperate intruder facing them, the world had narrowed to this single moment of absolute truth. The intruder's finger began to tighten on the trigger, and James knew that the moment of action had finally arrived. Everything he had trained for, everything he believed in, and everyone he had sworn to protect depended on what happened next. The split second before violence erupted stretched like an eternity in James Morrison's mind. He could see the intruder's finger completing its pull on the trigger, could calculate the trajectory of the weapon, could anticipate every possible outcome of the next few moments. But more than anything, he could feel the absolute trust of the 8-year-old princess pressed against his back, counting on him to keep her safe. "Run, Isabella! Now!" James shouted as he threw himself sideways, using his body to shield the princess while simultaneously drawing his own weapon. The movement was born of countless training drills, but powered by something far more primal, the instinctive need to protect an innocent child from harm. The intruder's shot rang out across the peaceful garden, the sharp crack echoing off the palace walls and shattering the morning tranquility. James felt the bullet pass close enough to tear through the fabric of his uniform jacket, missing his torso by mere inches. His own tactical role brought him into a better position while Isabella, following his instructions perfectly, sprinted toward the palace entrance with the speed that only terror and adrenaline could provide. Isabella's legs pumped frantically as she ran, her carefully braided hair streaming behind her and her patent leather shoes clicking rapidly against the stone pathway. The 8-year-old princess had never run so fast in her life, but she followed James's instructions exactly, not looking back, despite the terrifying sounds of conflict erupting behind her. James came up from his role in a combat crouch, his weapon trained on the intruder who was already adjusting his aim for a second shot. "Armed intruder in the garden!" James shouted into his radio. "Princess Isabella is mobile toward the palace entrance. All units execute protective protocol immediately." The response was instantaneous. Sergeant Williams's voice crackled through the radio. Copy that, Captain. Units 2 and 3 are converging on the princess's position. Unit 4 has visual on the additional suspects. Engaging now. The intruder realized his tactical situation had become untenable, but desperation drove him to continue his pursuit. He pivoted toward Isabella's fleeing figure, raising his weapon to target the running child. The sight of a grown man pointing a gun at an 8-year-old princess triggered something primal in James's protective instincts. Not going to happen, James growled, firing a precise shot that struck the intruder's weapon hand. The man's gun spun away across the grass as he cried out in pain and surprise. James's marksmanship was the product of 15 years of constant training, and his shot had been calculated to disable rather than kill, maintaining the option for interrogation and intelligence gathering. The wounded intruder clutched his bleeding hand but didn't retreat. Instead, he reached inside his coveralls with his uninjured hand, producing what appeared to be a small explosive device. James's blood ran cold as he realized the man was prepared to use a bomb, potentially killing not just Isabella but anyone else in the vicinity. "Everyone down," James shouted into his radio. "Suspect has explosive device. Clear the area around the princess." He began running toward the intruder, knowing that closing the distance was the only way to prevent the man from using the device effectively. Isabella heard James's shout and instinctively dropped to the ground behind a large stone planter, her royal etiquette training overridden by pure survival instinct. The move probably saved her life. As the wounded intruder struggled with the explosive device, his injured hand making it difficult to activate the mechanism. James covered the distance between them in seconds, his athletic conditioning and adrenaline allowing him to move with incredible speed. The intruder saw him coming and frantically tried to arm the explosive, but his wounded hand was clumsy and the device's activation sequence was apparently more complex than a simple trigger. The tackle that brought down the intruder was textbook perfect, learned through years of defensive training and honed by absolute necessity. James's shoulder caught the man in the midsection, driving him backward and away from Isabella's position. The explosive device flew from the intruder's hands, skittering across the grass to land harmlessly several yards away. The two men crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs, with James using his superior training and motivation to quickly gain control. The intruder was skilled and dangerous, but he was also wounded, isolated, and facing someone whose protective instincts had been fully activated. "Isabella, stay down!" James called out as he struggled to subdue the intruder. The man was fighting with the desperation of someone who knew capture meant failure, and his resistance was fierce despite his injured hand. James could hear the sound of running footsteps as his security team converged on their position. The explosive device lay on the grass like a malevolent metal egg, its purpose unclear but its threat undeniable. James made a mental note of its location while focusing on neutralizing the immediate danger posed by the man beneath him. Training and experience took over as he applied a restraint hold that would keep the intruder conscious but helpless. Sergeant Williams arrived first, his weapon drawn and his professional composure intact despite the chaos of the situation. "Captain, what's the status on the explosive device?" he asked, even as two other team members took control of the subdued intruder. "Unknown type and activation method," James replied, breathing heavily from the physical confrontation. "Keep everyone clear until the bomb squad can examine it. What's the situation with the other suspects?" "Neutralized and in custody," Williams reported with satisfaction. Units 4 and 5 coordinated a pincer movement and took them down before they could reach the garden. No shots fired on their end. They surrendered when they realized their primary operation had failed. James felt a wave of relief wash over him, but his first priority remained unchanged. "Where's Princess Isabella?" he asked, scanning the area around the stone planter where she had taken cover. "I'm here, Captain Morrison," came a small voice from behind the planter. Isabella's golden head appeared cautiously above the stone rim, her blue eyes wide with the shock of what she had just experienced. "Is it safe now?" James's heart nearly broke at the sight of her frightened but brave face. "It's safe now, Your Highness," he assured her, walking slowly toward her position. "The bad men can't hurt you anymore. You followed my instructions perfectly, and you were very, very brave." Isabella stood up on shaky legs, her usually perfect appearance disheveled by her desperate run and dive for cover. Her blue dress was stained with grass. Her braided hair had come partially undone, and there were tears in her white stockings. but she was alive, unhurt, and safe, which was all that mattered to James.
"Are you hurt, Captain Morrison?" Isabella asked, noticing the torn fabric of his uniform jacket and the grass stains from his rolling tackle. Even in the aftermath of terror, her concern was for others rather than herself.
"Just a few scrapes, Your Highness," James replied, kneeling down to her eye level. "Nothing that won't heal. But I'm very proud of you for being so brave and following instructions so well. You probably saved both our lives by running when I told you to." The palace doors burst open as Isabella's parents, King Edward and Queen Charlotte, rushed out surrounded by additional security personnel. The royal couple had been awakened by the emergency protocols and informed of the attack on their daughter. Queen Charlotte's face was pale with fear, while King Edward's expression showed the barely controlled fury of a father whose child had been threatened. "Isabella!" Queen Charlotte cried out, rushing toward her daughter despite the security team's attempts to maintain protective formation. The reunion between mother and child was immediate and overwhelming, with Isabella finally allowing herself to cry as she was swept into her mother's protective embrace. King Edward approached James with an expression of profound gratitude mixed with royal authority. "Captain Morrison," he said formally, "report on the situation, please," but his eyes conveyed a personal thanks that went far beyond official protocol. James stood at attention despite his disheveled appearance. "Your Majesty, Princess Isabella is safe and unharmed. 3 intruders attempted a coordinated abduction during the morning garden walk. All suspects are in custody, and 1 explosive device has been recovered for examination. The princess showed remarkable courage and followed emergency instructions perfectly." The king's composure nearly broke as the reality of how close they had come to losing their daughter settled in. "Captain Morrison, you have our eternal gratitude," he said quietly. "Isabella is our most precious treasure, and you have protected her with your life. The crown will not forget this service." Isabella looked up from her mother's embrace to focus on James. Despite her tears and the trauma she had just endured, her voice carried the clear authority of someone born to rule. "Captain Morrison is a hero, Papa," she said with absolute certainty. "He kept his promise to keep me safe, and he was very brave." James felt the weight of emotion threaten to overcome his professional composure. "It was my honor to serve, Your Highness," he replied formally. "Protecting you is not just my duty, it's my privilege." As the bomb squad arrived to examine the explosive device and the captured intruders were led away for interrogation, James allowed himself a moment to process what had just occurred. The peaceful morning garden walk had become a life-and-death confrontation, but through training, teamwork, and perhaps a measure of divine providence, Princess Isabella was safe. The investigation that would follow would reveal the full scope of the plot against the royal family, but for now, James Morrison had fulfilled his oath in the most fundamental way possible. He had stood between innocence and evil, and innocence had prevailed. Isabella's trust in him had never wavered even in the face of mortal danger, and he had proven worthy of that trust. The 8-year-old princess would grow up to remember this day not as a moment of terror, but as the day she learned that true heroes really do exist, and that sometimes they wear the uniform of a palace guard who refuses to let evil win.